They say Christmas is the season of giving, but what happens when the only thing your family gives you is abandonment? My name is Sarah Hughes, and I'm 78 years old. 3 years ago, I buried my husband of 52 years. Last Christmas Eve, I thought I was finally going to feel whole again, surrounded by the children I raised, the grandchildren I adored. Instead, I found myself alone in a cold, empty parking lot at midnight, clutching my purse and wondering how the people I loved most in this world could leave me behind like yesterday's newspaper. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What I'm about to tell you might shock you. It might make you angry. It might even make you cry. But I need to share this story because somewhere out there, there's another grandmother, another mother, another woman who needs to know that she's not alone, and that sometimes the most painful betrayals lead us to the most beautiful discoveries about what family truly means. You see, that night in the parking lot changed everything. Not just my Christmas plans, not just my holiday traditions, but my entire will. Yes, you heard that right. By New Year's Day, I had completely rewritten who would inherit everything. I'd spent a lifetime building. My children thought they knew me. They thought they knew what they were entitled to. They were wrong on both counts. My story begins 3 weeks before Christmas, in the kitchen that had been the heart of my home. For over 4 decades, I was standing at the same marble counter where I'd rolled out thousands of sugar cookies, where I'd packed countless school lunches, where I'd held my children's hands through scraped knees and broken hearts. The morning sun streamed through, the lace curtains I'd hung when Ronald and I first moved into this house, and for a moment, I could almost pretend he was still upstairs, humming off-key in the shower like he did every morning for 52 years. But Ronald wasn't upstairs. Ronald was buried in Greenwood Cemetery, under the oak tree we used to visit every spring to watch the new leaves unfold. And I was alone in this big, quiet house, surrounded by decades of memories, but desperately craving the sound of living, voices, of laughter, of the chaos that comes with a family gathered together. That morning, I made a decision that would change everything, though I couldn't have known it then. I picked up my phone and dialed my eldest daughter, Jennifer. My hands trembled slightly as I waited for her to answer, not from age, but from hope. Hope that maybe this year would be different. Hope that maybe my children had finally realized that their mother needed them, not just their perfunctory phone calls and obligatory birthday cards. Jennifer answered on the 4th ring, her voice already harried at 8 in the morning. "Mom, hi, I'm just getting the kids ready for school. Can this be quick?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself against the counter. "Jennifer, sweetheart, I was hoping we could talk about Christmas plans. I know everyone's busy, but I was thinking maybe this year we could all spend Christmas Eve together, like we used to when you were children. I could make my famous prime rib, and we could exchange gifts, and maybe watch some of those old Christmas movies you kids used to love." There was a pause, and I could hear the sounds of morning chaos in the background. My grandson Tommy was complaining about something, and my granddaughter Emma was asking for help finding her backpack. Real family sounds. The sounds I missed so desperately that sometimes I played old home videos just to remember what it felt like to be needed. "Mom, you know how hectic the holidays are. Jason's family expects us at their place, and the kids have so many activities. Maybe we could do something simple this year? Like meet for lunch somewhere?" My heart sank, but I pressed on. I'd learned over the past 3 years that if I didn't advocate for myself, no one else would. What if I made it easy for everyone? I don't need you to cook or clean or bring anything. I just want to be with my family. It's been so quiet here since your father passed, and Christmas was always his favorite holiday. I heard Jennifer sigh, and I could picture her checking her watch, mentally calculating how much longer this conversation would take. "Let me talk to the others and see what we can work out, okay? I really do have to run now, Mom. Love you." The line went dead before I could say I loved her too. I stood there in my kitchen, holding the silent phone, feeling smaller than I had in months. But I wasn't ready to give up. Jennifer had always been the practical one, the organizer, the one who took charge. If anyone could make Christmas happen, it would be her. I decided to call my son Michael next. Michael was my middle child, the charmer, the one who could talk his way out of anything and make you laugh while he did it. He'd inherited his father's easy smile and his ability to make everyone feel like the most important person in the room. At least, he used to make me feel that way. His phone went straight to voicemail, so I tried his office. His secretary, a pleasant woman named Carol who'd been there for years, recognized my voice immediately. "Mrs. Hughes, how lovely to hear from you. I'm afraid Michael is in meetings all morning, but I can have him call you back this afternoon." "That would be wonderful, Carol. Please tell him it's about Christmas plans. It's important." "Of course, I'll make sure he gets the message." I spent the rest of the morning trying to keep busy, but my mind kept wandering to Christmases past. I found myself in the living room, looking at the built-in shelves that displayed decades of family photos. There was 5-year-old Jennifer, in her red velvet Christmas dress, gap-toothed and grinning. Michael at 8, covered in flour from helping me bake cookies. My youngest, David, asleep under the Christmas tree at age 3, still clutching the toy truck Santa had brought him. In every photo, Ronald and I were there too, younger versions of ourselves, our faces bright with the joy that comes from watching your children discover the magic of Christmas morning. I picked up my favorite photo, taken when the kids were teenagers. We were all wearing matching Christmas sweaters, the kind that are so ugly they're wonderful. Everyone was laughing because David had just made some silly joke, and Ronald had his arm around me, his eyes twinkling with the same mischief I'd fallen in love with 40 years earlier. When had we stopped taking family photos? When had Christmas become something to endure rather than celebrate? When had my children started seeing me as an obligation rather than the woman who'd given them life, who'd stayed up all night when they were sick, who'd cheered at every soccer game in school? Play and graduation? Michael called back around 2 o'clock, his voice warm and familiar. For a moment, hearing him say, "Hi, Mom," in that special way of his, I felt like maybe everything would be okay. "Carol said you wanted to talk about Christmas. What's on your mind?" I repeated my request, painting a picture of the Christmas Eve I'd been dreaming about for months. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Family dinner, gift exchange, maybe some Christmas carols around the piano that hadn't been played since Ronald died. Simple traditions that had once meant everything to us. "Mom, that sounds really nice, but you know how crazy things get this time of year. The kids have their school programs, and Lisa's been planning this big Christmas party for her book club. Maybe we could do something after New Year's. Things are always calmer then." After New Year's. When Christmas would be over, when the magic would be packed away with the decorations, when the season of joy would be just another memory. "Michael, I understand everyone's busy, but I'm not asking for much. Just one evening. Just Christmas Eve. I'll do all the work, I promise. I just want to be with my family." There was a pause, and I could hear him typing on his computer. Even during our phone call, he was multitasking, dividing his attention between his mother and whatever. Email couldn't wait 5 minutes. "Let me see what I can do, Mom. I'll talk to Jennifer and David and we'll figure something out. Maybe we could at least stop by for dessert or something." Stop by for dessert, like I was a neighbor, not the woman who'd raised him. My last call was to David, my baby, now 35 years old and a successful attorney. David had always been the sensitive one, the one who seemed to understand my moods without explanation. If anyone would recognize how much I needed this Christmas with my family, it would be David. But David's response was perhaps the most painful of all, because it came wrapped in the kind of psychological language that made it sound reasonable, even caring. "Mom, I hear what you're saying, and I can tell this is really important to you. But I'm wondering if maybe we should think about why you're feeling so dependent on having all of us together. You've been doing so well since Dad died, building your independence, finding your own interests. Don't you think having such high expectations for Christmas might be setting yourself up for disappointment?" Setting myself up for disappointment. As if wanting to spend Christmas with my children was some kind of character flaw, some weakness I needed to overcome. David, I'm not being dependent. I'm being hopeful. There's a difference. Of course, Mom, and I'm not trying to minimize your feelings. It's just that maybe this year we could start some new traditions, something that doesn't put so much pressure on everyone to perform the perfect family Christmas. Perform the perfect family Christmas. As if love was a performance, as if wanting to be together was pressure rather than privilege. After I hung up from David, I sat in Ronald's favorite chair, the big leather recliner that still smelled faintly of his cologne, and I cried. Not the gentle tears of missing him that I'd grown accustomed to, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place I didn't even know existed. I cried for the woman I used to be, the mother who was central to her children's lives. I cried for the grandmother whose grandchildren barely knew her. I cried for the Christmases that would never come again, and for the loneliness that had become my most constant companion. But then something shifted inside me. Maybe it was Ronald's spirit, or maybe it was just the stubborn streak that had gotten me through 78 years of life's challenges. I wiped my eyes, straightened my shoulders, and made a decision. If my children wouldn't come to me, I would go to them. Not to their homes, where I would be a guest to be accommodated, but somewhere neutral, somewhere that might remind them of the joy we used to share. I would ask them to take me Christmas shopping, the way we used to do when they were young, and Christmas shopping was an adventure, not a chore. I called Jennifer back that evening, after dinner, when I knew the kids would be doing homework and she might have a few minutes to really talk. "Mom, hi again. Everything okay?" "Everything's fine, sweetheart. I've been thinking about what you said this morning, about everyone being so busy. I have an idea that might work for everyone." I could hear the caution in her voice. "What kind of idea?" "What if you all took me Christmas shopping this Saturday? Just for a few hours. We could go to Westfield Mall, have lunch in the food court like we used to, and I could pick up gifts for the grandchildren. It would be like old times, but without any pressure for a big family dinner or anything complicated." There was a longer pause this time, and I held my breath. "Actually, Mom, that might work. Let me check with Michael and David, but I think we could probably manage a few hours on Saturday. The kids could use some Christmas shopping time, too." For the first time in weeks, I felt genuinely hopeful, not just because they'd said yes, but because Jennifer's voice had warmed when she talked about it being like old times. Maybe my children did remember the joy we'd once shared. Maybe they missed it too. I spent the rest of the week preparing for our shopping trip with the kind of excitement I hadn't felt since I was a child myself. I carefully chose my outfit, a deep green sweater that Ronald had always said brought out my eyes, and my good winter coat, the wool one with the pretty buttons that the grandchildren used to love to play with when they sat on my lap. More importantly, I spent time at my lawyer's office, updating some documents I'd been meaning to revise since Ronald's death. My will had been a source of pride for both of us. We'd worked hard our entire lives, saved carefully, invested wisely. The house alone was worth over $800,000 now, and there were investment accounts, savings, Ronald's life insurance, and various other assets that totaled well over $2 million. We'd always planned to leave everything to our children and grandchildren, to give them the kind of financial security that would let them pursue their dreams without worry. But sitting in my lawyer's office that Wednesday afternoon, I found myself thinking about legacy in a different way. What was the point of leaving money to people who couldn't spare a few hours for Christmas dinner? What message was I sending? About the value of family, of respect, of simple human kindness? I didn't make any changes that day. I just reviewed everything, made sure I understood exactly what I was planning to leave to whom, and asked my lawyer about the process for making modifications if I ever wanted to. Of course, Mrs. Hughes, changes can be made at any time, as long as you're of sound mind and not under any duress. Is there something specific you're considering? No, nothing specific. I just want to understand my options. That night, I called each of my children to confirm our Saturday plans. Everyone was still on board, and I went to bed feeling more excited about a day out than I had in months. Saturday morning dawned clear and cold, with the kind of crisp winter air that makes everything seem possible. I was ready by 9, even though we weren't meeting until 10:30. I sat by the front window, watching for cars, feeling like a teenager waiting for her first date. Jennifer arrived first, driving her silver SUV with Tommy and Emma in the back seat. My heart leaped when I saw them. Tommy was 12 now, tall for his age and trying so hard to look cool that he almost succeeded. Emma was 9, all long legs and bright smile, still young enough to run to her grandmother without worrying about what anyone thought. "Grandma Sarah!" Emma launched herself at me as soon as she got out of the car, and for a moment, the loneliness of the past 3 years melted away. This was what I'd been missing. This connection, this unconditional love, this reminder that I mattered to someone. Tommy was more reserved, but he let me hug him and even smiled when I told him how much he'd grown since I'd seen him last. Michael arrived next with his wife Lisa and their twin boys, Kevin and Kyle, who were 7 and identical in everything except their ability to sit still. They were sweet children, but they barely knew me well enough to make eye contact, much less accept hugs from their grandmother. David came last, alone. He'd divorced 2 years earlier, and his ex-wife had moved to California with their daughter, my granddaughter Sophie. I missed Sophie terribly, but David's visits were so infrequent that I rarely got updates about how she was doing. Standing in my driveway, surrounded by my family for the first time in months, I felt a surge of pure happiness. This was going to be perfect. This was going to be the beginning of getting my family back. We decided to take 2 cars to the mall. I rode with Jennifer and her children, settling into the passenger seat with my purse carefully positioned on my lap. Inside that purse were my credit cards, some cash, a small notebook where I'd written down gift ideas for each grandchild, and a folder containing updated copies of my will and other important documents. I'd gotten in the habit of carrying these papers with me everywhere since Ronald died, partly for practical reasons, and partly because it made me feel more in control of my life. The drive to Westfield Mall took about 20 minutes, and I spent most of it listening to Emma chatter about school and friends and the Christmas play she was going to be in. Tommy was quieter, absorbed in his phone, but occasionally he'd look up and add something to the conversation. These were the moments I treasured, the ordinary family interactions that had become so rare in my life. As we pulled into the mall parking lot, I felt a wave of nostalgia. This was where I'd brought my children for back-to-school shopping every August, where we'd spent countless Saturday afternoons when they were young, where Ronald and I had done our Christmas shopping every year until arthritis made walking long distances too difficult for him. The mall was bustling with holiday shoppers, families with young children, teenagers in groups, elderly couples walking slowly hand in hand. The sounds and smells of Christmas were everywhere. Holiday music playing from speakers, the scent of cinnamon from the pretzel stand, children's excited voices echoing off the high ceilings. We started at the toy store, where I planned to pick out gifts for all the grandchildren. This was familiar territory for me. I might not see them often enough, but I knew their interests, their ages, what would make their faces light up on Christmas morning. For Emma, I chose a deluxe art set with pastels and colored pencils and a sketchbook. She'd always been creative, and I remembered how she used to draw pictures for me every time she visited. For Tommy, I found a complex Lego architecture set of the Empire State Building. He'd been fascinated by tall buildings since he was small, and I thought maybe this would be something we could work on together sometime. For Kevin and Kyle, I picked out matching remote control cars, but in different colors so they could tell them apart. For Sophie, even though she lived across the country, I chose a beautiful jewelry box with a ballerina that spun to music. David could ship it to her, or maybe, if I was lucky, she might come for a visit sometime soon. My children were patient with me at first, helping me navigate the crowded store, offering opinions on my choices. But I noticed that as the shopping trip progressed, their attention began to wander. They were constantly checking their phones, having conversations with each other that didn't include me, making subtle comments about the time and other places they needed to be. After the toy store, we moved on to the department store, where I wanted to pick up some nice sweaters for my children and their spouses. This took longer than the toy shopping, partly because I wanted to choose carefully, and partly because walking was becoming more difficult for me. My arthritis was acting up, aggravated by the cold weather and all the walking on hard mall floors. "Mom, maybe we should take a break," Jennifer suggested as I paused to rest near a display of handbags. "There's a bench over by the food court." I was grateful for the suggestion, though I tried not to show how much I needed the rest. We made our way slowly to the center of the mall, where the food court was already crowded with families taking a break from shopping. We found a large table, and Michael went to get drinks for everyone while Lisa helped the twins choose what they wanted for lunch. This was the part of the day I'd been looking forward to most, sitting together as a family, sharing a meal like we used to do. But even at lunch, I felt like I was watching my family rather than being part of it. Jennifer and Lisa were deep in conversation about some school fundraiser. Michael and David were discussing business, using terms and references that made it clear they talked regularly without me. The grandchildren were focused on their food and their phones, polite when I asked them questions but not really engaged. I tried to insert myself into the conversations, to share news about my neighbors or ask about their work, but I felt like I was interrupting rather than contributing. When had I become such an outsider in my own family's life? After lunch, we continued shopping. I wanted to stop at the jewelry store to look at some earrings for Jennifer and Lisa, and maybe find something nice for myself. Ronald had been generous with jewelry over the years, but most of my pieces were classic styles from decades past. I thought maybe something more contemporary would make me feel more modern, more relevant. As we browsed the jewelry store, I noticed my family getting more restless. The grandchildren were bored, which I understood. Shopping for grandmother's jewelry wasn't exactly exciting for kids. But my adult children were showing signs of impatience too, checking their watches, exchanging glances that I pretended not to see. "Mom, how much more shopping do you need to do?" David asked as I tried on a pair of silver earrings. "We've been here for almost 3 hours." 3 hours. When I was their age, 3 hours of Christmas shopping was just getting started. But I could see that for them, 3 hours with their mother was approaching the limit of their endurance. "Just a few more stops," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "I want to pick up some nice chocolates for the neighbors, and maybe look at those kitchen gadgets for Lisa. I won't be much longer." I saw Michael and Jennifer exchange another look, and my heart sank. This was supposed to be our special day, together, but they were treating it like an endurance test. We left the jewelry store with me having purchased the silver earrings, more as a way to end that stop than because I particularly wanted them. As we walked through the mall, I noticed that the group was becoming more spread out. Jennifer and Lisa were walking ahead with Emma, deep in their own conversation. Michael was trying to keep the twins corralled while also talking on his phone. David was walking beside me, but I could tell his attention was elsewhere. Only Tommy seemed present in the moment, occasionally pointing out interesting store displays or commenting on the crowds. I found myself gravitating toward him, grateful for any real connection with my family. We made it through 2 more stores, the chocolate shop and a kitchen store where I bought Lisa a nice set of measuring spoons and Jennifer a ceramic spoon rest painted with flowers. But by then, it was clear that everyone was ready to go home. "Mom, I think we should probably start wrapping up," Jennifer said as we stood outside the kitchen store. "The kids are getting tired, and we all have things we need to do this evening." I looked around at my family, these people I loved more than life itself, and I could see the truth written on their faces. They'd done their duty. They'd spent the afternoon with their mother, helped her with her Christmas shopping, fulfilled their obligation. Now they were ready to get back to their real lives, the lives that didn't include me except on special occasions and holidays that were becoming increasingly rare. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "I think I've gotten everything I need anyway. Thank you all so much for doing this with me. It's meant the world to me." And it had meant the world to me, even though it had also broken my heart a little. This was the most time I'd spent with my entire family since Ronald's funeral 3 years ago. Even if they were eager to leave, even if I felt more like a burden than a beloved mother and grandmother, it was still more than I'd had in months. We began walking toward the exit, but as we passed a small coffee shop, I realized I desperately needed to use the restroom. The coffee I'd had with lunch, combined with my age and the medications I took for my blood pressure, had caught up with me. "I need to make a quick stop," I told the group, gesturing toward the restroom sign. "We'll wait for you right here, Mom," Jennifer said, and the others nodded in agreement. I made my way to the restroom, grateful for a few moments alone, to collect myself and prepare for the end of what had been both one of the best and most disappointing days I'd had in years. As I washed my hands and checked my appearance in the mirror, I tried to focus on the positive aspects of the day. I had spent time with my grandchildren. I had accomplished my Christmas shopping. I had evidence that my family still cared enough to spend an afternoon with me, even if their enthusiasm had waned as the day progressed. When I emerged from the restroom 5 minutes later, ready to rejoin my family and head home, I looked around the area where they'd promised to wait for me. They were gone. At first, I thought maybe they'd moved to a different spot, somewhere more comfortable or less crowded. I walked slowly around the nearby area, checking the coffee shop, the bookstore, the hallway leading to another set of restrooms. No sign of my family anywhere. I stood in the middle of the mall concourse, holding my shopping bags and my purse, trying to make sense of what was happening. Maybe they'd gone to the car and were waiting for me there. Maybe there had been some emergency with one of the grandchildren. Maybe they'd just stepped into a nearby store and would be back any moment. I waited for 15 minutes, then 20, then 30. The crowds were thinning out as the mall prepared to close. Store employees were starting to pull down security gates. The custodial staff was beginning their evening cleaning routines. I tried calling Jennifer's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Michael's phone did the same. David's phone rang several times before going to voicemail as well. As the reality of my situation began to sink in, I felt something I hadn't experienced since I was a small child. The pure, terrifying panic of being lost and alone. But this was worse than childhood fears, because this wasn't an accident. This was intentional. My family had left me here deliberately. The mall was closing. The final announcement came over the loudspeaker. "Attention shoppers, Westfield Mall is now closed. Please make your final purchases and exit the building. Thank you for shopping with us, and have a wonderful evening." I gathered my shopping bags and made my way slowly toward the exit, still hoping against hope that I would find my family waiting in the parking lot, full of apologies and explanations. Maybe their car had broken down. Maybe there had been an emergency call. Maybe there was some reasonable explanation for why they would leave their 78-year-old mother alone in a shopping mall on a December evening. But the parking lot was nearly empty, and my family was nowhere to be seen. I stood there in the cold, under the harsh fluorescent lights of the parking lot, surrounded by shopping bags full of Christmas gifts for people who had just abandoned me, and I finally understood the depth of my loneliness. It wasn't just that I missed Ronald, or that I wished I saw my family more often. It was that I had become invisible to the people who should have loved me most. I had become so irrelevant to their lives that they could literally forget about me and drive away. The security guard who found me 20 minutes later was a young man, probably in his early 20s, with kind eyes and a gentle voice that reminded me of David when he was that age. "Ma'am, are you okay? Do you need help getting to your car?" I looked up at him, this stranger who was showing me more concern than my own children had, and I began to cry. Not the quiet tears of sadness I'd grown accustomed to, but deep, shaking sobs that came from a place of absolute devastation. "I don't have a car," I managed to say between sobs. "My family was supposed to take me home, but they left without me." The young man's face changed, his professional concern shifting to something more personal, more protective. "They left, you hear? On purpose?" "I don't know if it was on purpose," I said, though even as I spoke the words, I knew it was a lie. You don't accidentally leave someone behind when you came together. You don't accidentally forget your mother in a shopping mall. "What's your name, ma'am?" "I'm Marcus, and I'm going to make sure you get home safely." Marcus. Like the Roman emperor, I thought randomly, my mind grasping for anything to focus on besides the crushing reality of my situation. "I'm Sarah Hughes," I said, fumbling in my purse for tissues. "I live on Maple Street about 20 minutes from here." Marcus helped me to a bench near the mall entrance and sat down beside me. He was patient while I tried to compose myself, offering me water from his thermos and asking gentle questions about what had happened. As I told him about the shopping trip, about waiting by the restroom, about my family's disappearance, I watched his face carefully. I was looking for signs of judgment, of the kind of dismissive attitude I'd gotten used to from people who assumed that old people were confused, unreliable, prone to exaggeration. But Marcus listened to every word with the kind of attention I hadn't received from anyone in years. He asked clarifying questions that showed he was taking me seriously. He expressed outrage on my behalf that made me feel less alone. "Mrs. Hughes, that's terrible. I can't imagine how scared and hurt you must be feeling right now." It was such a simple statement, but it meant everything to me. Someone believed me. Someone understood that this wasn't just a miscommunication or an honest mistake. Someone recognized that what had happened to me was wrong. Marcus tried calling my children's numbers from his own phone, thinking maybe they would answer an unfamiliar number if they were avoiding mine. But all 3 calls went to voicemail, and none of them called back. "I could call you a taxi," Marcus offered, "but I'm not comfortable with the idea of you going home alone after what you've been through tonight. Would it be okay if I drove you home when my shift ends? I just need to check with my supervisor, but I think we can work something out." I was touched by his kindness, but I was also aware that accepting help from a stranger, even one in a security uniform, might not be the wisest choice for a woman my age. "That's very kind of you, Marcus, but I don't want to impose. And I should probably call a taxi. I'll be fine." Marcus studied my face for a moment, and I could see him weighing his options. "Mrs. Hughes, can I be honest with you? I don't think you should be alone tonight. What happened here isn't normal, and I'm worried about you. I have an idea if you're open to it." He went on to explain that his grandmother lived in an assisted living facility about 10 minutes from my house, and that he visited her every evening after work. He could take me home, make sure I was safely inside, and maybe even stay for a cup of coffee if I wanted the company. "My grandmother is about your age, and if something like this happened to her, I would hope that someone would make sure she wasn't alone." There was something about Marcus that reminded me not just of David, but of the young man David used to be, before life made him cynical and analytical and distant. Marcus had a quality that seemed to be disappearing from the world. Simple, Human decency. "I would be very grateful for the ride home," I said finally. "And if you have time for coffee, I think I would like the company very much." Marcus's supervisor, an older woman named Gloria, was understanding about the situation and agreed to let Marcus leave a few minutes early. As we walked to his car, Marcus carrying most of my shopping bags despite my protests, I found myself telling him things I hadn't shared with anyone since Ronald died. I told him about the loneliness that had become my constant companion. I told him about the grandchildren I barely knew, about the house that felt too big and too quiet, about the way my children treated me like an obligation rather than a person they genuinely wanted to spend time with. Marcus listened without trying to fix anything or offer advice, which made it easier to keep talking. He just listened, occasionally asking questions that showed he was paying attention, sometimes sharing brief stories about his own grandmother that made me feel less alone in my experiences. When we pulled into my driveway, Marcus insisted on walking me to the door and waiting while I found my keys. The house felt especially dark and empty after the day's brief illusion of family togetherness. "Would you like to come in for that coffee?" I asked, surprising myself with how much I hoped he would say yes. "I'd like that very much, Mrs. Hughes." As I busied myself making coffee in the kitchen that had felt so lonely that morning, Marcus looked at the family photos on my refrigerator and the Christmas cards displayed on the counter. When I handed him his mug, he gestured toward a photo of my grandchildren. "These are beautiful kids. They look like they have a wonderful grandmother." I almost started crying again, but this time from gratitude rather than despair. When was the last time someone had said something so genuinely kind about my role as a grandmother? We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Ronald and I had shared thousands of meals, where I'd helped my children with homework, where I'd planned birthday parties and holiday celebrations, and all the small moments that make up a family's life together. Marcus told me about his grandmother, Rosa, who had raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 8. He talked about her with such love and respect that I felt both happy for her and envious of the relationship they shared. "She's the strongest person I know," he said. "She worked 2 jobs to support us, never missed a school event, always made me feel like I was the most important thing in her world. Now that she's older and needs more help, taking care of her isn't a burden. It's a privilege." A privilege. When was the last time one of my children had seen caring for me as a privilege rather than an inconvenience? We talked for over an hour, and I found myself feeling more relaxed and hopeful than I had in months. Marcus had a way of making me feel interesting, valuable, worth listening to. He asked about my life, my marriage, my career as a high school English teacher, my interests and opinions. When he finally said he needed to go check on his grandmother, I walked him to the door with genuine reluctance to see him leave. "Mrs. Hughes, I want you to know that what happened tonight wasn't your fault. Your family's behavior says nothing about your worth as a person or as a mother. You deserve so much better than that." After Marcus left, I sat in Ronald's chair, still wearing my green sweater and good wool coat, thinking about the day's events. I thought about my children's impatience, their eagerness to be somewhere else, their willingness to abandon me. In a parking lot, I thought about Marcus's kindness, his grandmother's good fortune in having someone who saw caring for her as a privilege. And I thought about the folder in my purse, the one containing my will and other important documents. I thought about the $2 million I was planning to leave to people who couldn't spare an evening for Christmas dinner, who couldn't wait patiently while their mother shopped for their children's gifts, who could drive away and leave me stranded without apparently giving it a second thought. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. But first, I needed to understand exactly what had happened in that mall parking lot. The phone rang at 6:30 the next morning, jarring me from the first real sleep I'd managed in hours. I'd spent most of the night sitting in Ronald's chair, replaying every moment of the previous day, trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. When I finally dragged myself to bed around 3, My mind was still racing with questions that had no good answers. I stumbled to the kitchen phone, hoping against hope that it would be one of my children calling to explain, to apologize, to make some sense of what had happened. Instead, it was Jennifer's voice, bright and cheerful as if nothing unusual had occurred. "Good morning, Mom. I hope you slept well. I wanted to call and thank you for yesterday. The kids had such a nice time shopping with you." I stood there in my kitchen, holding the phone, wondering if I was losing my mind. Had I imagined being abandoned in that parking lot? Had I somehow misunderstood what happened? "Jennifer," I said slowly, "you left me at the mall." There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her voice had shifted to that careful tone people use when they're dealing with someone they think might be confused. "Mom, what do you mean? We all left together when you were ready to go." "No, Jennifer. I went to the restroom, and when I came out, all of you were gone. I was stranded there until closing time. A security guard had to help me get home." Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear the wheels turning in Jennifer's head as she tried to figure out how to handle this conversation. "Mom, I think there might be some confusion here. We waited for you, but when you didn't come back, we assumed you'd found another way home. Maybe you got mixed up about where we were supposed to meet?" The gaslighting was so smooth, so confident, that for a moment I almost believed her. Maybe I had gotten confused. Maybe my memory wasn't as reliable as I thought. Maybe this was the beginning of the decline I'd been dreading since Ronald died. But then I remembered Marcus. I remembered the kindness in his eyes, the way he'd listened to my story without judgment, the way he'd believed me completely. I remembered the feeling of standing alone in that parking lot, the terror and bewilderment of realizing that my family was truly gone. "Jennifer, I waited exactly where you told me to wait. I wasn't confused. You all left without me." "Mom, I really think you might be misremembering what happened. Sometimes when we're upset or tired, our minds can play tricks on us. Maybe we should talk about getting you evaluated by someone, just to make sure everything's okay." Getting me evaluated. As if the problem was my mental state rather than their behavior. As if being abandoned by my family was a delusion rather than a devastating reality. "I don't need to be evaluated, Jennifer. I need my children to take responsibility for leaving their mother alone in a shopping mall." Jennifer's voice grew firmer, more patronizing. "Mom, I understand that you're upset, but making accusations isn't going to help anyone. We all care. About you very much. But we can't help you if you're not willing to acknowledge that there might be some memory issues we need to address." Memory issues. The phrase hung in the air between us like a weapon. This was how it would be dismissed then. This was how my family would explain away their cruelty. Their mother was getting old, getting confused, making up stories about being abandoned. "My memory is fine, Jennifer. What's not fine is having a daughter who would rather question my sanity than admit she made a mistake." "Mom, please don't take that tone with me. I'm trying to help you, but you're making this very difficult." I hung up the phone without saying goodbye, my hands shaking with anger and hurt. Within minutes, it rang again. This time it was Michael, his voice carefully neutral in a way that told me he and Jennifer had already compared notes. "Hey, Mom. Jennifer told me you called this morning upset about yesterday. She's worried that maybe you're having some confusion about what happened." "I'm not confused, Michael. I'm hurt and angry that my children abandoned me and are now trying to convince me it didn't happen." Michael sighed, and I could picture him running his hand through his hair the way he'd done since he was a little boy when faced with a problem he didn't want to deal with. "Mom, nobody abandoned you. We looked for you when you didn't come back from the restroom, but we couldn't find you. We figured you'd gotten tired and called a taxi or something. We even drove around the parking lot, looking for you." "You drove around the parking lot looking for me?" "Michael, I was standing right there in the parking lot for 20 minutes. If you'd been looking for me, you would have found me." Maybe we missed each other somehow. These things happen, Mom. The important thing is that you got home safely. The important thing is that you got home safely, as if my feelings, my experience, my terror and humiliation were irrelevant as long as the practical problem had been solved. The important thing, Michael, is that I was alone and frightened and abandoned by my family. The important thing is that a stranger showed me more kindness than my own children did. Mom, you're being dramatic. Nobody abandoned you. Sometimes there are miscommunications, especially in crowded places like malls. David called an hour later with the same script, the same careful denial, the same suggestion that I was confused or dramatic or unreliable. By the time I hung up from that conversation, I felt more alone than I had even standing in that parking lot. This was worse than being abandoned. This was being gaslit, being told that my reality wasn't real, that my experience didn't matter, that my perceptions couldn't be trusted. My children weren't just dismissing what they'd done to me. They were actively trying to convince me it hadn't happened at all. I spent the rest of Sunday in a strange state of suspended disbelief. I kept replaying the conversations with my children, looking for some crack in their certainty, some sign that they knew they were lying, but their conviction was absolute. Either they genuinely believed their version of events, or they were better actors than I'd ever given them credit for. By Monday morning, I'd made a decision. I called my lawyer's office and scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. If my children wanted to pretend that abandoning me was a miscommunication, if they wanted to question my mental faculties rather than examine their own behavior, then it was time for me to take control of the situation in the only way I still could. Margaret Foster had been my lawyer for over 15 years, handling everything from our estate planning to the legal issues that had arisen after Ronald's death. She was a woman about my own age, sharp and practical, with the kind of no-nonsense attitude that I appreciated. Sarah, good to see you again. How are you holding up? I've been better, Margaret. I need to make some changes to my will. Margaret didn't seem surprised. She'd seen enough families torn apart by grief and money, and the complex dynamics that surfaced when someone died. What kind of changes are you thinking about? I told her everything. The failed Christmas plans, the shopping trip, the abandonment, the phone calls the next morning. I watched her face as I spoke, looking for signs of the same dismissive attitude I'd gotten from my children. Instead, I saw growing anger on my behalf. Sarah, that's appalling. Even if there was some kind of genuine miscommunication, which frankly I doubt, their response to your distress is unacceptable. It was such a relief to have someone believe me, to have my experience validated by someone whose judgment I trusted. I want to change my will, Margaret. I want to leave everything to someone who actually values family, someone who understands what it means to care for the people you love. That's certainly your right, Sarah. But I want to make sure you're thinking this through carefully. Disinheriting your children is a big step, and it's not easily undone. I'm not acting impulsively, Margaret. This isn't about one bad day. This is about 3 years of feeling like an afterthought in my children's lives. This is about being treated like a burden rather than a person they're glad to have in their lives. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. Tell me about this security guard who helped you. Marcus, was it? I found myself smiling for the first time since Saturday night as I described Marcus. His kindness, his respect for his grandmother, the way he'd made me feel valued and important. I told her about our conversation in my kitchen, about his genuine concern for my well-being. He sounds like a remarkable young man. But Sarah, you need to be very careful about making major financial decisions based on one positive interaction with someone you've just met. It's not just about Marcus, though he is wonderful. It's about what he represents. It's about the kind of person who sees caring for elderly family members as a privilege rather than an obligation. It's about recognizing kindness and rewarding it instead of enabling the people who take me for granted. Margaret was quiet for a long moment, tapping her pen against her legal pad in a rhythm I recognized from our previous meetings. She was thinking, weighing options, considering implications. If you're serious about this, Sarah, I want to suggest a modified approach. Instead of immediately disinheriting your children completely, what if we set up a more complex structure? You could leave them smaller bequests, enough to make it clear that you didn't forget them, but direct the majority of your estate elsewhere. What would be the advantage of that? It makes it much harder for them to contest the will. If you leave them nothing, they can argue that you were mentally incompetent or under undue influence. If you leave them something, even something small, it demonstrates that you were thinking clearly and making deliberate choices. This made sense to me. I wasn't interested in creating a legal battle that would drag on for years and ultimately benefit no one but the lawyers. I wanted to make a statement, to send a message about values and priorities and the consequences of taking family for granted. What did you have in mind? We could leave each of your children a token amount, say $25,000 each, along with some personal items of sentimental value. Then we could direct the rest of your estate to establishing a trust or foundation that would benefit the causes and people you care about. Like Marcus and his grandmother? Possibly. Though I'd want to do some research on him first, make sure we understand his situation fully. And we'd want to structure it in a way that provides ongoing benefit rather than just a lump sum payment. We spent the next hour outlining possibilities. A scholarship fund for young people who were supporting elderly relatives, a grant program for assisted living facilities that provided exceptional care, a trust that would pay for in-home care for elderly people whose families couldn't or wouldn't help them. The more we talked, the more excited I became. This wasn't just about punishing my children for their behavior. This was about creating something positive, something that would help other families avoid the kind of breakdown that mine had experienced. I want to do this, Margaret. I want to create something meaningful with the money Ronald and I worked so hard to save. I think it's a wonderful idea, Sarah, but I want you to take some time to think about it. Sleep on it for a few days. Make sure this is really what you want to do. How long would it take to make the changes once I'm sure? If we're restructuring everything the way we've discussed, probably about 2 weeks to get all the documents prepared and properly executed. That evening, I called the number Marcus had given me. I wasn't sure what I was going to say, but I felt a need to hear his voice, to be reminded that there were still good people in the world. Hello, Mrs. Hughes. I was just thinking about you. How are you feeling today? The genuine warmth in his voice made my throat tight with emotion. When was the last time someone had asked how I was feeling and actually waited to hear the answer? I've had better days, Marcus. My children called this morning and they're insisting that what happened yesterday was all a misunderstanding. That must be incredibly frustrating. Do you believe them? No, I don't. But it makes me question myself, you know? When the people who are supposed to love you most tell you that your reality isn't real, it's hard to maintain confidence in your own perceptions. Mrs. Hughes, can I tell you something? I've been working security for 3 years, and I've seen a lot of family situations, especially around the holidays. I've never, not once, seen a genuine miscommunication that resulted in someone being left alone in a closed mall. That doesn't happen by accident. His certainty was like a lifeline. Someone believed me. Someone with experience in these situations was telling me that my instincts were correct. Thank you for saying that, Marcus. I needed to hear it. Mrs. Hughes, I hope you don't mind me asking, but do you have other family or friends you can spend time with? People who treat you better than your children did yesterday? It was a simple question, but it forced me to confront a reality I'd been avoiding. Since Ronald died, my social circle had shrunk dramatically. Most of our couple friends had gradually stopped including me in their activities. My few remaining close friends had their own families to focus on during the holidays. I'd become increasingly dependent on my children for social contact, which had given them enormous power over my emotional well-being. Not really, I admitted. I've let my social life revolve around my family, and that hasn't worked out very well. Would you be interested in meeting my grandmother? I think you two would really like each other, and she's always saying she wishes she had more friends her own age to talk to. The offer caught me off guard. I'd become so accustomed to being excluded, to being seen as a burden, that the idea of someone actively wanting to introduce me to their family seemed almost too good to be true. I would love that, Marcus. But are you sure your grandmother would want to meet a stranger? Mrs. Hughes, my grandmother Rosa is one of those people who doesn't believe in strangers, only friends she hasn't met yet. She's going to love you. We made plans for me to visit the assisted living facility on Wednesday evening. Marcus would pick me up after work, we'd have dinner with Rosa, and then he'd drive me home. It was the first social plan I'd made in months that I was genuinely excited about. Tuesday passed quietly. I didn't hear from any of my children, which was both a relief and a disappointment. Part of me had hoped that one of them might call to apologize, to acknowledge that maybe their version of events wasn't entirely accurate. But the silence just reinforced my growing conviction that Margaret's advice was sound. I spent the day thinking about the foundation we'd discussed, researching similar organizations online, trying to understand how to structure something that would have real impact. The more I learned, the more passionate I became about the idea. Wednesday evening, Marcus arrived exactly on time, dressed in slacks and a button-down shirt instead of his security uniform. He looked younger somehow, and I could see more clearly the resemblance he bore to David at that age. "You look very nice, Mrs. Hughes. That blue dress is perfect for you." I'd chosen my outfit carefully, wanting to make a good impression on Rosa. The blue dress was one of my favorites, a classic style that Ronald had always complimented. The drive to Sunset Manor took about 15 minutes, and Marcus spent the time telling me about Rosa's background. She'd immigrated from Puerto Rico as a young woman, worked as a seamstress for 40 years, raised 3 children as a single mother after her husband died young. When Marcus's parents were killed, she didn't hesitate to take in an 8-year-old boy and reshape her entire life around his needs. She sounds like an amazing woman. She is. She's the reason I am who I am. Everything good about me I learned from her. Sunset Manor was a pleasant-looking facility, well-maintained and welcoming, with a lobby that felt more like a nice hotel than an institutional care facility. Marcus led me through hallways lined with artwork and plants, past common areas where residents were engaged in various activities. Rosa's apartment was on the 2nd floor, a cheerful 2-room space filled with family photos, colorful textiles, and the lingering scent of something delicious cooking in her small kitchen. Rosa herself was a tiny woman, probably not more than 5 feet tall, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun and dark eyes that sparkled with intelligence and humor. When Marcus introduced us, she took my hands in both of hers and smiled as if she'd been waiting her whole life to meet me. "Sarah, Marcus told me so much about you. Come, sit, tell me everything." Within minutes, I felt completely at ease. Rosa had a gift for making people feel important, for asking the right questions and listening to the answers with complete attention. We talked about our marriages, our children, our experiences of aging and loss and the unexpected challenges of navigating family relationships later in life. "Marcus told me what happened to you at the mall," Rosa said as we shared the dinner she'd prepared, a delicious chicken and rice dish seasoned with herbs I couldn't identify. "I am so sorry, Misha. Children sometimes forget that their parents are people too, with feelings and needs." "Have you ever experienced anything like that with your children?" Rosa exchanged a look with Marcus, and I sensed there was a story there. "My older son, Carlos, he lives in Florida now. For many years after I moved here, he would call and tell me I should sell this place, move somewhere cheaper, not waste money on assisted living when I could take care of myself. That must have been difficult." It was because he didn't understand that I wasn't paying for help with cooking and cleaning. I was paying for community, for safety, for the peace of mind that comes from knowing help is available if I need it. He saw it as an expense. I saw it as an investment in my quality of life. This resonated deeply with me. My children seemed to view any money I spent on myself as an unnecessary expense, as if I should be hoarding every penny for their eventual inheritance. How did you handle it? I told him that it was my money and my decision, and that if he wanted to have a relationship with me, he needed to respect my choices. It took a while, but eventually he understood. And if he hadn't understood, Rosa's expression grew serious. Then I would have accepted that some relationships aren't meant to survive, even family relationships. Love shouldn't come with conditions, Sarah. If someone only loves you when you do what they want, that's not really love. After dinner, we moved to Rosa's small living room, where she showed me photo albums spanning decades of family history. Pictures of Marcus as a shy 8-year-old, gradual transformation into the confident young man sitting beside us. Pictures of family celebrations, graduations, holidays filled with laughter and genuine affection. You raised a wonderful grandson, Rosa. The kindness he showed me the other night probably saved me from complete despair. Marcus has a good heart, but he learned kindness by receiving it. Children become what they experience. The comment hit me like a physical blow. What had my children experienced from me? Had I somehow failed to teach them kindness, empathy, respect for their elders? Had I been so focused on providing for them materially that I'd neglected to instill the values that would make them good people? Rosa, do you think parents are responsible when their adult children behave badly? She considered the question carefully. I think parents are responsible for doing their best with the knowledge and resources they have. But children make their own choices as adults. You can teach someone to be kind, but you cannot force them to choose kindness. I keep wondering if I failed somehow, if there was something I should have done differently. Sarah, from everything. Marcus has told me you raise children who are successful in their careers, who have families of their own, who are capable of functioning in the world. The fact that they are not treating you well now doesn't erase everything you did right for 20 years. Marcus had been quiet during this exchange, but now he leaned forward in his chair. Mrs. Hughes, can I tell you what I observed the other night? You were hurt and frightened and abandoned, but you were also dignified and gracious and kind. You thanked me for helping you even though you had every right to be angry at the world. You offered me coffee and listened to my stories about my grandmother. You treated a stranger with more warmth and respect than your own family had shown you. That says everything about who you are as a person, Rosa added, and it makes your children's behavior even more inexcusable. We talked until almost 10 o'clock, covering everything from books we'd read to places we'd traveled to the challenges of maintaining independence as we aged. By the time Marcus was ready to drive me home, I felt like I'd found something I hadn't even realized I was looking for: genuine friendship. Rosa, thank you for such a lovely evening. I can't remember when I've enjoyed myself more. You must come back soon, Sarah, and next time, bring some of those photos you mentioned. I want to see pictures of you and your husband when you were young. On the drive home, Marcus and I were both quiet, comfortable in the kind of silence that comes after a particularly meaningful evening. Thank you for introducing me to your grandmother, I said as we pulled into my driveway. She's extraordinary. She really likes you, Mrs. Hughes. She told me while you were in the bathroom that you remind her of herself at your age. Independent, thoughtful, still interested in learning new things. I hope I can live up to that comparison. As I got ready for bed that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Genuine excitement about the future. Not because anything in my situation with my children had changed, but because I'd discovered that there were still new relationships to be formed, new connections to be made, New ways to find meaning and purpose. Thursday morning, I called Margaret to schedule a follow-up appointment. I've thought about everything we discussed, Margaret, and I'm ready to move forward with the changes to my will. You're sure about this, Sarah? I'm sure, but I want to make one addition to what we planned. I'd like to set aside money specifically to benefit Rosa Martinez and her grandson Marcus. They've shown me what family really looks like. We'll need to be careful about how we structure that to avoid any appearance of impropriety, but I think we can make it work. There's something else, Margaret. I want to include a letter with the will, explaining my decisions. I want my children to understand that this isn't about revenge or spite. It's about rewarding the kind of behavior I want to see in the world. That's very wise, Sarah. A letter of instruction can provide context that the legal document itself cannot. We scheduled an appointment for the following Tuesday to begin the formal process of restructuring my estate. I spent the weekend drafting and redrafting the letter I wanted to include, trying to find the right balance between explaining my reasoning and avoiding accusations that might sound vindictive. Saturday afternoon, Jennifer called again. Hi, Mom. I was thinking about our conversation on Sunday and I wanted to check in with you. Are you feeling better about everything? The assumption that I should be feeling better about being abandoned and then gaslit was almost breathtaking in its tone deafness. I'm feeling clearer about things, if that's what you mean. Good. I'm glad you're not still upset about that misunderstanding at the mall. There it was again. The misunderstanding. The refusal to acknowledge what had actually happened. Jennifer, can I ask you something? Of course, Mom. Do you remember when you were 7 years old and you broke the ceramic angel that belonged to my mother? There was a pause. Vaguely. Why? You lied about it at first. You told me that it had fallen off the shelf by itself. But when I explained that lying made the situation worse, not better, you told me the truth. You said you'd been playing with it and dropped it. Mom, I'm not sure what this has to do with anything. It has to do with the fact that I taught you to tell the truth, even when it was difficult. I taught you to take responsibility for your actions. I taught you that people deserve honesty, especially from the people who love them. Jennifer's voice grew cooler. Mom, if you're trying to say that we're lying about what happened last Saturday, that's really hurtful. We've told you what we remember, and if that doesn't match your memory, maybe we need to consider that there might be other explanations. Other explanations, like dementia, like confusion, like the gradual decline of an aging mind that could no longer be trusted. Jennifer, I'm not confused. I'm not misremembering. I'm hurt and disappointed that my children would rather question my sanity than admit they made a mistake. Nobody's questioning your sanity, Mom. We're just concerned about you, and we want to make sure you're getting the support you need. Support, but not from them, apparently. From professionals, from doctors, from anyone except the people who should have been supporting me all along. I have all the support I need, Jennifer. Thank you for your concern. I hung up before she could respond, and this time when the phone rang a few minutes later, I didn't answer it. I was done defending my reality to people who had already decided. It wasn't valid. Sunday evening, Marcus called to check on me. How was your weekend, Mrs. Hughes? It was enlightening, Marcus. I had another conversation with my daughter that confirmed everything I've been thinking about my family relationships. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you okay? I'm better than okay. I'm finally seeing things clearly. And speaking of clarity, I want to tell you something, but I need you to promise me you won't feel obligated or uncomfortable about it. Of course, Mrs. Hughes. What is it? I'm making some changes to my will, Marcus. I'm setting up a foundation to help families like yours. Families where young people are caring for elderly relatives, and I'm including provisions that will benefit you and Rosa specifically. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Mrs. Hughes, that's incredibly generous, but I can't accept something like that. I helped you because it was the right thing to do. not because I expected anything in return. I know that, Marcus. That's exactly why I want to do this. You helped me because you're a good person with good values. Rosa raised you to understand that caring for family is a privilege, not a burden. I want to reward that kind of character. But Mrs. Hughes, we barely know each other. Marcus, in 3 hours of conversation, you and Rosa showed me more genuine warmth and respect than my own children have shown me in 3 years. Sometimes knowing someone for a long time matters less than really seeing who they are. What? About your children? What about your grandchildren? They'll be taken care of. They'll receive enough to know that I didn't forget them. But the majority of my estate will go to people and causes that represent the values I want to promote. Mrs. Hughes, are you sure this is what you want to do? I don't want you to make decisions you might regret later. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Marcus. For the first time since Ronald died, I feel like I have purpose again. I feel like I can create something meaningful with the life I have left. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen, with a cup of tea, watching the December snow fall outside my window. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt peaceful. It felt like the home of someone who had finally figured out what really mattered. Tomorrow, I would meet with Margaret again and begin the formal process of restructuring my will. I would create a foundation that would help other elderly people who found themselves alone and forgotten. I would ensure that Marcus and Rosa were rewarded for their kindness. And I would write a letter to my children that would explain, clearly, and without anger, why their behavior had consequences. For the first time in years, I felt powerful instead of powerless. I felt like someone who mattered, someone whose choices could make a difference in the world. My children had taught me an important lesson in that mall parking lot, though not the one they'd intended. They'd taught me that blood relationship doesn't guarantee love, that family is something you create through your actions, not something you inherit through your genetics. They'd also taught me that I still had choices to make, decisions that would outlive me and reflect my values long after I was gone. In trying to diminish me, they had actually freed me to become the person I was meant to be in the final chapters of my life. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in clean white silence, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in 3 years. Genuine peace. The letter from my attorney arrived on a Tuesday morning in late January, thick and official-looking, in its manila envelope. Inside were the finalized documents that would reshape my legacy, along with Margaret's note confirming that everything had been executed according to my wishes. The Sarah Hughes Foundation was now a legal entity, funded with the bulk of my estate and designed to provide support for families caring for elderly relatives. I held the papers in my hands, feeling their weight both literally and figuratively. These documents represented more than just legal changes. They represented my declaration of independence from a family that had forgotten how to value me. They represented my investment in a future where kindness and respect would be rewarded, instead of taken for granted. Since our conversation about the will changes, my relationship with Marcus and Rosa had deepened into something that felt more natural and sustainable than the forced interactions I'd endured with my own children. We'd settled into a comfortable routine of weekly dinners together, sometimes at Rosa's apartment in Sunset Manor, sometimes at my house, occasionally at a restaurant that Rosa particularly enjoyed. These gatherings had become the highlight of my week, something I looked forward to with genuine excitement rather than the anxious hope that had characterized my interactions with Jennifer, Michael, and David. With Marcus and Rosa, I never felt like I was imposing or overstaying my welcome. Our conversations flowed naturally, covering everything from current events to shared memories to dreams for the future. Rosa had become particularly dear to me, a friend who understood the unique challenges of aging in a world that seemed increasingly youth-obsessed. She had a way of making me laugh about situations that might otherwise cause frustration or sadness. When I complained about feeling invisible in stores or restaurants, she would share stories about the surprising advantages of being underestimated by younger people. "Let them think we're harmless old ladies," she would say with a mischievous grin. "They never see us coming." Marcus, meanwhile, had become like the son I'd always hoped to have but never quite achieved. He was attentive without being condescending, helpful without being controlling, affectionate without expecting anything in return. He called me regularly just to check how I was doing, included me in decisions about Rose's care when appropriate, and treated my opinions and preferences as valuable contributions to our conversations. The contrast with my biological children became more stark with each passing week. They had maintained their pattern of minimal contact since the mall incident, calling occasionally with perfunctory inquiries about my health, but showing little interest in my daily life or emotional well-being. When they did call, the conversations felt scripted, as if they were checking items off a duty list rather than connecting with someone they genuinely cared about. February brought an unexpected development that would test the strength of my new relationships and clarify my feelings about the decisions I'd made. Rosa had been experiencing some health issues, nothing immediately life-threatening, but concerning enough to require additional medical attention and possibly a higher level of care than Sunset Manor could provide. Marcus called me on a Wednesday evening, his voice tight with worry. "Mrs. Hughes, I need to talk to someone, and I hope you don't mind me calling you about this." "Of course not, Marcus. What's happening?" "It's Rosa. She's been having some episodes where she gets confused and disoriented. The doctors think it might be the early stages of dementia, but they need to do more testing to be sure." My heart ached for both of them. I'd watched Ronald struggle with similar issues in his final months, and I knew how frightening and heartbreaking it could be for both the person experiencing the confusion and their loved ones watching it happen. "How is Rosa handling this?" "She's scared, Mrs. Hughes. She's trying to be brave about it, but I can see how worried she is about losing her independence, about becoming a burden." The word burden hit me like a physical blow. How many times had I worried about the same thing with my own children? How many times had I sensed their impatience and assumed it meant I was becoming an unwelcome obligation in their lives? "Marcus, has Rosa said she feels like a burden?" "Not directly, but I can tell she's thinking about it. She keeps apologizing for needing help with things she used to manage on her own. She keeps telling me I shouldn't have to worry about her so much." "What do you tell her when she says things like that?" I tell her the truth, that taking care of her isn't a sacrifice for me, it's a privilege. That she gave me everything when I needed it most, and now I get to give something back. That loving someone means staying with them through the difficult times, not just the easy ones. I found myself crying quietly as Marcus spoke, not from sadness but from recognition. This was what love looked like when it was freely given and gladly received. This was what family relationships could be when they were built on genuine affection and mutual respect, rather than obligation and duty. "Marcus, how can I help?" "What do you need?" "Just having someone to talk to helps more than you know." "But Mrs. Hughes, there's something else. If Rosa's condition progresses, she might need to move to a memory care facility, and those are expensive. Even with her insurance and savings, I'm not sure we can afford the kind of place that would give her the quality of life she deserves." "Marcus, you know that money isn't going to be an issue. The foundation will cover whatever Rosa needs, and if there are immediate expenses before that can be arranged, I can handle them personally." There was a long pause before Marcus responded, and when he did, his voice was thick with emotion. "Mrs. Hughes, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for us. You've given us so much more than money. You've given us family. You've given me the same thing, Marcus. You've shown me what it means to be valued and appreciated, to be included rather than tolerated." Over the following weeks, I became deeply involved in Rosa's care in a way that felt both natural and healing. I accompanied her to doctor's appointments. When Marcus couldn't get away from work, sat with her during testing procedures, helped research memory care facilities when it became clear that she would eventually need specialized care. None of this felt like a burden or an obligation. It felt like love in action, like the kind of family support I'd always imagined giving and receiving. Rosa, even as her confusion increased, never made me feel unwelcome or unnecessary. She seemed to understand instinctively that I was there because I wanted to be, not because I had to be. The memory care facility we eventually chose was a beautiful place called Willowbrook, about 15 minutes from my house. It was expensive, but the staff was compassionate and skilled, and the environment was designed to be both safe and stimulating for residents with cognitive challenges. Rosa's transition to Willowbrook was easier than we'd expected, partly because of the quality of the facility, and partly because she knew that Marcus and I would be regular visitors. We established a routine of visiting together twice a week, sometimes more often if Rosa was having a particularly difficult day. During one of our visits in early March, Rosa had a moment of unusual clarity. She took my hand as we sat in the botched garden courtyard, looking directly into my eyes with the sharp intelligence that had always been one of her most striking characteristics. "Sarah, I want you to know something. Before I forget everything else, I want you to know how grateful I am that Marcus found you that night at the mall." "Rosa, I'm the one who should be grateful. You and Marcus saved me from despair." "No, Mija, you saved yourself. You chose to see kindness when it was offered instead of staying bitter about the kindness that was withheld. That takes strength and wisdom." She squeezed my hand gently, her gaze never wavering. "Your children don't know what they lost when they walked away from you. But Marcus and I, we know what we gained." It was one of the last fully coherent conversations we would have, and I treasured every word of it. Spring brought news that forced me to confront the reality of my choices in a more immediate way. Margaret called on a Thursday morning to inform me that my oldest granddaughter, Emma, had been accepted to several prestigious universities and was trying to decide between them. "Jennifer called my office yesterday," Margaret explained. "She wanted to know if there were any education provisions in your will that might help with Emma's college expenses." My heart clenched at the mention of Emma, the sweet 9-year-old, who had hugged me so enthusiastically in my driveway before that disastrous shopping trip. She was 17 now, on the verge of adulthood, probably having no idea that her grandmother had been systematically excluded from the important milestones of her teenage years. "What did you tell Jennifer?" "I told her that I couldn't discuss the specifics of your will with anyone but you, but that she was welcome to have you contact me if you wanted to share that information." "Have I heard from Jennifer about this?" "Not yet. But Sarah, I wanted to ask you directly. Emma is your granddaughter, and from what you've told me about her over the years, she's a good kid who's not responsible for her parents' behavior. Are you comfortable with the idea of her struggling financially for college because of decisions her parents made?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been dreading since I made the changes to my will. My anger was with my children, not with their children. Emma, Tommy, Kevin, Kyle, and Sophie had done nothing wrong except have parents who'd forgotten how to value their elders. "What are my options, Margaret?" "Well, the foundation could potentially fund educational scholarships, couldn't it? You could establish criteria that your grandchildren might qualify for, without specifically naming them as beneficiaries." This was brilliant, and exactly the kind of creative solution I'd come to expect from Margaret. The grandchildren could benefit from my estate, but only by meeting standards that reflected the values I wanted to promote. "What kind of criteria are you thinking about?" "Requirements for community service, particularly service to elderly populations, essays about the importance of family relationships and respecting elders, perhaps interviews with recipients to assess their character and values." "I love this idea, Margaret. It means the grandchildren could still benefit from my estate, but only if they demonstrate the kind of values their parents failed to instill." "Exactly. And it sends a message about what you consider important without punishing children for their parents' failures." We spent the next hour working out the details of what would become the Hughes Family Values Scholarship Program. Recipients would need to demonstrate significant volunteer work with elderly populations, write essays about respect and family responsibility, and participate in interviews designed to assess their character and empathy. The scholarship would be substantial enough to cover full tuition at most universities, but the requirements would ensure that only students who truly understood the importance of treating elders with dignity and respect would qualify. There's one more thing I want to add, I told Margaret as we finished outlining the program. I want Emma to know about this scholarship opportunity, but I want her to earn it on her own merits. No special consideration because she's my granddaughter. Are you going to tell Jennifer about it? I think I'll tell Emma directly. She's old enough to make her own decisions about whether she wants to apply. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I called Emma's cell phone number, which I'd gotten from a Christmas card 2 years earlier, but had never used because I'd always gone through Jennifer to communicate with the grandchildren. Emma answered on the second ring, her voice bright and familiar despite the months that had passed since I'd heard it. Hello? Emma, this is your grandmother, Sarah Hughes. Do you have a few minutes to talk? There was a pause, and I could almost hear her surprise across the phone line. Grandma Sarah. Oh my gosh. Hi. Mom told me you'd been having some health issues. How are you feeling? Health issues. So that was how Jennifer had explained my absence from family events and holidays. Not as abandonment or mutual estrangement, but as my declining health making social interaction difficult. I'm feeling well, actually, Emma, I wanted to call and congratulate you on your college acceptances. I heard you have some wonderful options. Thank you. Yeah, I got into my top 3 choices, which is amazing, but now I have to figure out how to pay for them. College is so expensive, and my parents are already stretched thin with Tommy's activities and everything. Emma, that's actually part of why I'm calling. I've established a scholarship program through a foundation I'm involved with, and I think you might be a strong candidate for it. I explained the requirements for the Hughes Family Values Scholarship, watching carefully to see how Emma responded to the emphasis on service to elderly populations and respect for family relationships. That sounds really interesting, Grandma Sarah. I've actually been volunteering at a nursing home near our house for the past 2 years. I started going there because I needed service hours for school, but I kept going because I really enjoy spending time with the residents. My heart swelled with pride and hope. Maybe Jennifer and her husband had managed to raise children with good values despite their own failures in that area. Tell me about your volunteer work, Emma. Well, I go there every Saturday morning and help with activities. Sometimes I read to residents who have vision problems. Sometimes I help with art projects or games. There's this one lady, Mrs. Patterson, who tells me stories about what it was like to be a young woman during World War II. Her stories are incredible. What do you like most about volunteering there? I love how much wisdom the residents have. They've lived through so much history, experienced so many changes in the world. And I love feeling like I can make their day a little brighter just by spending time with them and treating them like the interesting, valuable people they are. I found myself crying again, but this time with joy rather than sadness. Here was proof that goodness could survive and flourish even in families that had lost their way. Here was evidence that the values I'd tried to instill in my children had somehow been passed down to the next generation, even if they'd been forgotten by the generation in between. Emma, you sound like exactly the kind of young person this scholarship is designed to support. Would you be interested in applying? Absolutely. Grandma Sarah, this could change everything for me. I've been so worried about the financial burden my education would put on my parents. The application process is rigorous, Emma. You'll need to document your volunteer work, write several essays, and participate in an interview. The standards are high because the scholarship is substantial. I understand. I'm not afraid of hard work, and this is something I really believe in. We talked for another 20 minutes, and I found myself falling in love with the intelligent, compassionate young woman Emma had become. She asked thoughtful questions about the Foundation's mission, shared stories about her volunteer work that demonstrated genuine empathy and maturity, and expressed gratitude in a way that felt sincere, rather than perfunctory. When we finally hung up, I felt more hopeful about my family's future than I had in years. Maybe my legacy wouldn't be defined by my children's failures, but by my grandchildren's successes. Maybe the values I'd tried to teach could still be passed down, even if they'd skipped a generation. The next few weeks brought a flurry of activity as Emma worked on her scholarship application. She called me several times to ask for clarification about the essay requirements and to share her thoughts about the topics she was addressing. Our conversations revealed a depth of character and insight that impressed me more each time we spoke. Meanwhile, my relationship with Marcus and Rosa continued to evolve and deepen. Rosa's condition was progressing slowly, with good days and difficult days, but her essential sweetness and dignity remained intact. Marcus was handling the challenges with remarkable grace, never complaining about the time and energy required to support her through this transition. During one of our visits to Willowbrook, Rosa had what the staff called a moment of sunlight, a period of unusual clarity that sometimes occurred with dementia patients. She looked at me with complete recognition and awareness, took my hand, and said something that would stay with me forever. "Sarah, I want you to promise me something. When I'm gone, don't let Marcus blame himself for not being able to save me from this disease. And don't you blame yourself for anything that happened with your children. Sometimes love isn't enough to fix what's broken, and that's not anyone's fault." "I promise, Rosa." "Good. Now tell me about your granddaughter's scholarship application. Marcus says she sounds like a wonderful girl." Even in her confusion, Rosa remembered the things that mattered most to the people she loved. It was a lesson in grace that I tried to carry with me every day. Emma's scholarship interview was scheduled for a warm day in May. The interview panel consisted of Margaret, a social worker who specialized in elder care, and a professor of gerontology from the local university. I was not part of the panel, but Margaret kept me informed about the process. According to Margaret, Emma's interview was exceptional. She spoke eloquently about her volunteer work, demonstrated genuine understanding of the challenges facing elderly people in our society, and articulated a vision for her future that included ongoing advocacy for aging populations. When asked why respect for elders was important to her, Emma reportedly said, "Because they're living repositories of wisdom and experience. Every elderly person has survived decades of history, overcome countless challenges, and learned lessons that could benefit all of us if we just take the time to listen." The scholarship was awarded to Emma 3 days later, covering her full tuition to the university of her choice, plus a substantial allowance for books and living expenses. When Margaret called to tell me the news, I felt a satisfaction that was deeper and more complete than anything I'd experienced in years. "Emma earned this, Sarah. She didn't get it because she's your granddaughter. She got it because she's exactly the kind of young person the program was designed to support." I couldn't be prouder of her, Margaret. There's something else you should know. Emma asked if she could write a thank you letter to the scholarship donor. She doesn't know it's you, of course, but she wanted to express her gratitude personally. I'd love to receive that letter. The letter arrived a week later, handwritten on personal stationery in Emma's careful script. In it, she wrote about her dreams for the future, her commitment to serving elderly populations throughout her career, and her gratitude for the opportunity to pursue her education without financial stress. But the paragraph that moved me most was near the end. "I want you to know that this scholarship has taught me something important about the kind of person I want to become. Whoever you are, you've chosen to invest in values rather than just academic achievement. You've created something that rewards character and compassion. I hope that someday I'll be in a position to do something similar for the next generation. As I folded Emma's letter and placed it in the special box where I kept my most treasured correspondence, I realized that my transformation from abandoned mother to purposeful philanthropist was complete. I had found a way to create meaning from pain, to turn rejection into redemption, to ensure that my legacy would reflect my values rather than my disappointments. The foundation was thriving, supporting dozens of families caring for elderly relatives. Rosa was comfortable and well cared for at Willowbrook. Marcus had become the son I'd always wanted, and I had become the family he and Rosa deserved. Emma was beginning her journey toward a career dedicated to serving others. My children still called occasionally, their conversations still superficial and dutiful, but their indifference no longer had the power to devastate me. I had built a new life around people who valued me, and that life was rich and meaningful in ways I'd never expected. Summer brought another milestone, my 79th birthday. Instead of the quiet, lonely observance I'd endured for the past 3 years, I found myself celebrating with a chosen family that had grown to include not just Marcus and Rosa, but several other friends I'd made through the Foundation's activities. As I looked around my living room at the faces of people who had chosen to be there, who genuinely enjoyed my company and valued my contributions to their lives, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with biological relationships and everything to do with authentic connection. The abandoned woman from the mall parking lot was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own worth and refused to accept less than she deserved from the people in her life. It had taken me nearly 8 decades to learn this lesson, but it wasn't too late to apply it to the years I had remaining. Outside my window, the summer evening was warm and peaceful, filled with the sounds of children playing and neighbors chatting over backyard fences. Inside my house, surrounded by friends who had become family, I finally understood what I'd been searching for all along. Not just to be loved, but to be valued. Not just to be included, but to be appreciated. Not just to be tolerated, but to be treasured. The pain of my children's abandonment would always be part of my story, but it was no longer the defining chapter. I had written new chapters filled with purpose, connection, and the deep satisfaction that comes from living according to your values rather than your fears. The call came on a crisp October morning while I was tending to the small herb garden I'd started behind my house. I'd discovered a passion for growing things in the months since establishing the foundation, finding peace in the simple rhythms of planting, watering, and harvesting. The basil and rosemary were thriving, and I'd been looking forward to sharing fresh herbs with Rosa during my afternoon visit to Willowbrook. Marcus's voice on the phone was strained, professional in the way that people sound when they're trying to hold themselves together during a crisis. "Mrs. Hughes, I'm at the hospital. With Rosa. She had another episode this morning, but this one was different. The doctors think she may have had a small stroke." I set down my gardening shears and gripped the phone tighter. "How serious is it, Marcus? Is she conscious?" "She's awake, but she's having trouble speaking clearly. The doctors are running tests to see how much damage there might be. Mrs. Hughes, I hate to ask this, but would you be able to come? She keeps asking for you, and I think having you here might help calm her down." "Of course I'll come. Which hospital?" "St. Mary's, room 314 in the cardiac wing." I changed out of my gardening clothes and drove to the hospital with my heart heavy with worry. Over the past months, Rosa had become more than a friend. She'd become the mother figure I'd needed after losing my own mother years before my marriage. The thought of losing her felt almost unbearable. I found Marcus in the waiting area outside Rosa's room, still wearing his security uniform from the night shift. His eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion and worry, and when he saw me, some of the tension left his shoulders. "Thank you for coming. So quickly. The doctors said we should be able to see her soon. They're finishing up some tests right now." I sat beside him in the uncomfortable plastic chairs that seemed to be standard in every hospital waiting room, taking his hand in mine. "How are you holding up?" "I'm scared, Mrs. Hughes. Rosa has been my anchor for so long. I don't know how to imagine a world without her in it. We're not going to think about that right now. We're going to focus on being here for her, giving her all the love and support we can. When we were finally allowed into Rosa's room, I was shocked by how small and fragile she looked against the white hospital sheets. The vibrant, spirited woman who had welcomed me into her life with such warmth seemed to have diminished overnight. But when Rosa saw me, her eyes lit up with recognition and relief. She tried to speak, but the words came out slurred and difficult to understand. I moved to the side of her bed and took her hand, which felt papery and cold in mine. "I'm here, Rosa. Marcus and I are both here with you." She squeezed my hand weakly and managed to say something that sounded like familia, the Spanish word for family. Even in her confusion and distress, she was thinking about the bonds that connected us, the chosen family we'd created together. The next few days were a blur of hospital visits, consultations with doctors, and difficult conversations about Rosa's prognosis. The stroke had been relatively minor, but it had accelerated the progression of her dementia significantly. She would need intensive care for the rest of her life, care that went beyond what Willowbrook could provide. Marcus was struggling with the financial implications of Rosa's increased care needs, despite my repeated assurances that the foundation would cover any expenses. He had inherited his grandmother's fierce pride and independence, and accepting help was difficult for him even when it came from someone who considered him family. "Mrs. Hughes, you've already done so much for us. I can't keep taking advantage of your generosity." "Marcus, you're not taking advantage of anything. This is what family does for each other. This is what love looks like in action." During one of our conversations in the hospital cafeteria, Marcus shared something that had been weighing on his mind. "I keep thinking about what you went through with your children, how they abandoned you when you needed them most. I'm terrified that I'm going to fail Rosa the way they failed you." "Marcus, that's not possible. You've already proven that by being here, by fighting for the best care for her, by putting her needs ahead of your own comfort and convenience. The difference between you and my children isn't about resources or capabilities. It's about love and commitment. But what if I make the wrong decisions? What if I can't give her what she needs? Then we'll figure it out together. You're not alone in this, Marcus. You have people who care about both of you, people who want to help." As Rosa's condition stabilized and we began the process of transitioning her to a specialized memory care facility, I found myself reflecting on the strange turns my life had taken. A year ago, I had been a lonely, abandoned mother, invisible to my own children and isolated from meaningful relationships. Now I was part of a family that had chosen each other, bound together by love and mutual respect, rather than biology and obligation. The new facility we found for Rosa was even more specialized than Willowbrook, with staff trained specifically in stroke recovery and advanced dementia care. It was also significantly more expensive, but I'd reached a point where I would have spent every penny of my savings to ensure Rosa received the care she deserved. On the day we moved Rosa to her new room, she had a moment of clarity that reminded me why I'd grown to love her so deeply. As Marcus and I arranged her few personal belongings, she looked directly at me and spoke with perfect lucidity. "Sarah, I need you to promise me something." "Anything, Rosa." "When I'm gone, I want you to make sure Marcus finds someone to love. He's been so focused on taking care of me that he's forgotten to build a life for himself. Promise me you'll help him remember that he deserves happiness." "I promise, Rosa, but you're not going anywhere anytime soon." She smiled with the wisdom of someone who understood her situation better than the rest of us wanted to acknowledge. "We all go somewhere. Eventually, mija. The important thing is making sure the people we love are okay when we do." That conversation stayed with me over the following weeks as I watched Marcus pour himself into Rosa's care with an intensity that was both admirable and concerning. He was working fewer hours to spend more time at the facility, eating poorly, sleeping badly, and showing all the signs of caregiver burnout that I'd seen in myself during Ronald's final illness. I began making subtle efforts to draw him into activities outside the facility, inviting him to dinner at my house, suggesting we take walks in the park, encouraging him to maintain the friendships he'd been neglecting. It was delicate work because I didn't want him to feel guilty about taking time for himself, but I could see that he needed respite from the constant weight of Rosa's declining health. During one of our dinners in November, Marcus opened up about something that had been troubling him. "Mrs. Hughes, I've been thinking about what Rosa said about finding someone to love. The truth is, I've been so focused on being her caregiver that I've forgotten how to be anything else. I don't even know how to have a normal conversation with someone my own age anymore. Marcus, you're 26 years old. You have your whole life ahead of you. Rosa wants you to have that life, not sacrifice it on the altar of guilt and obligation. But how do I balance loving her with loving someone else? How do I build a relationship when I'm spending every free moment at the memory care facility?" It was a question I understood better than he knew. I'd watched many couples struggle with similar issues when one partner's parent required intensive care. The key, I'd learned, was finding someone who understood that love multiplied rather than divided when it was shared. The right person will understand that your devotion to Rosa is part of what makes you lovable, not an obstacle to loving you. That winter brought unexpected developments on multiple fronts. Emma called me regularly from college, sharing stories about her classes and her continued volunteer work with elderly populations on campus. Her enthusiasm for her studies and her commitment to serving others reinforced my conviction that the scholarship program was achieving its intended goals. During one of our conversations, Emma mentioned something that caught my attention. "Grandma Sarah, I've been thinking a lot about family relationships lately, especially after taking a sociology class about aging and intergenerational dynamics. I keep wondering why we don't see each other more often. Mom always says you prefer to keep to yourself now, but that doesn't sound like the grandmother I remember." I chose my words carefully, not wanting to poison Emma's relationship with her mother, but also not wanting to perpetuate the fiction that my absence from family events was my choice. "Emma, relationships change as we get older. Sometimes people grow in different directions, and sometimes they discover that their values and priorities don't align the way they used to. But don't you miss us? Don't you want to be part of our lives?" The naked longing in her voice broke my heart. "Of course I miss you, sweetheart. I think about all of you constantly. Then why don't you come to family events anymore? Why don't you call or visit?" "Emma, that's a complicated question with a complicated answer. But I want you to know that my love for you and your brother and your cousins has never wavered. Not for a single moment." After that conversation, I found myself wondering if I'd been too passive in accepting my exclusion from my family's life. Had I been so focused on building new relationships that I'd given up too easily on repairing the old ones? Had my pride prevented me from making efforts that might have rebuilt some bridges? But then I would remember the phone calls after the mall incident, the gaslighting, the suggestion that I needed to be evaluated for mental competency. I would remember years of feeling like an inconvenience, of having my needs and preferences dismissed, of being treated like a burden rather than a beloved family member. The truth was that I'd tried for 3 years after Ronald's death to maintain meaningful connections with my children. I'd invited them for holidays, offered to help with the grandchildren, made myself available whenever they needed me. The response had been polite but distant, dutiful but not warm. They'd made it clear that I was welcome in their lives only when convenient and only on their terms. The mall incident had simply been the final, most dramatic example of a pattern that had been developing for years. They'd been abandoning me emotionally long before they abandoned me physically in that parking lot. Christmas was approaching, again, and with it came the familiar mix of anticipation and dread that had characterized the holiday season since Ronald's death. This year, though, I had plans that filled me with genuine excitement rather than anxious hope. Marcus and I had decided to host a small Christmas dinner at my house for the friends we'd accumulated through the foundation's activities. Rosa wouldn't be able to join us, but we would visit her on Christmas morning and bring some of the holiday celebration to her room. I spent weeks planning the menu, decorating the house, and preparing for what I hoped would become a new tradition. For the first time in years, Christmas felt like a celebration, rather than an endurance test. 2 weeks before Christmas, I received an unexpected phone call from Jennifer. "Hi, Mom. I hope you're doing well. I was calling because we're hosting Christmas Eve this year, and I wanted to invite you to join us." The invitation caught me completely off guard. After nearly 2 years of minimal contact, after the disaster of the mall incident and the subsequent gaslighting, Jennifer was reaching out as if nothing had happened. "That's very kind of you, Jennifer, but I already have plans for Christmas Eve." "Oh." There was a pause, and I could hear the surprise in her voice. She'd clearly expected me to be available, eager for any invitation into my family's life. "What kind of plans?" "I'm hosting dinner for some friends." "Friends? Mom, that's wonderful. I didn't realize you'd been socializing. Are these people from your church?" "Some of them are connected to a foundation I'm involved with. We've become quite close over the past year." "A foundation? Mom, what kind of foundation? You never mentioned being involved with any charitable work." The conversation felt surreal. Jennifer was speaking to me as if we'd been in regular contact, as if she knew anything about my daily life or activities. The assumption that she would be informed about my involvement with charitable work was particularly galling, given that she'd shown no interest in my life for months at a time. "It's a foundation that supports families caring for elderly relatives. I established it earlier this year." "You established a foundation? Mom, that's a big step. Did you consult with anyone about this? Did you talk to a financial advisor?" There it was again, the subtle suggestion that I wasn't competent to make my own decisions, that major choices in my life should be supervised and approved by my children. I worked with my attorney to set everything up properly. It's been very rewarding work. "I'm sure it has been, Mom, but I hope you're being careful about the financial implications. These kinds of charitable commitments can be difficult to get out of if your circumstances change." "My circumstances are quite stable, Jennifer, and my financial commitments are well within my means." "Of course, Mom. I just worry about you. Making big decisions without family input." Family input. From the family that had abandoned me in a mall parking lot and then tried to convince me it was my imagination. "I appreciate your concern, Jennifer, but I'm quite capable of managing my own affairs." The conversation ended awkwardly, with Jennifer making vague promises to call again soon and me making equally vague acknowledgments of her Christmas invitation. But the interaction left me feeling unsettled in a way I hadn't experienced in months. That evening, I called Margaret to discuss the conversation and my growing concerns about my family's potential reaction to the will changes when they eventually learned about them. "Sarah, it's not uncommon for families to become suddenly interested in an elderly relative's activities when they suspect changes to inheritance plans. Jennifer's questions about the foundation suggest that she may be picking up signals that something has shifted. Do you think she suspects what I've done? I think she's smart enough to realize that your increased independence and involvement in charitable work might have implications for your estate planning. The question is whether she'll try to address this directly or continue to circle around it indirectly. What should I be prepared for? Potentially increased attention from your children, efforts to reconnect that may feel sudden and convenient. Possibly questions about your mental competency if they become aware of the scope of the changes you've made, and if they challenge the will. The provisions we've built in should protect against successful challenges. You've been evaluated by multiple medical professionals. The changes were made over an extended period with consistent documentation, and you've demonstrated clear reasoning for your decisions. But litigation is always possible, even if it's ultimately unsuccessful. The conversation reinforced my conviction that I'd made the right choices, even if those choices might eventually create conflict with my biological family. I'd lived too many years prioritizing their comfort over my own needs and values. If they wanted to challenge my decisions, they would have to confront the reasons behind those decisions. Christmas Eve arrived with a light snow that made my house look like something from a holiday card. I'd spent the morning at Willowbrook with Rosa, who seemed to enjoy the Christmas music playing in the common areas, even though she was no longer able to communicate clearly. Marcus and I had decorated her room with small touches that we hoped would bring her some comfort and joy. My Christmas Eve dinner was a gathering of 8 people, including Marcus, several volunteers from the foundation, and Emma, who had surprised me by driving down from college to join us. The evening was everything I'd hoped it would be: warm, genuine, filled with laughter and meaningful conversation. As we sat around my dining room table, sharing stories and enjoying the meal I'd spent days preparing, I felt a contentment that had eluded me for years. This was what family felt like when it was built on choice rather than obligation, on mutual respect rather than duty. Emma was particularly delightful company, charming everyone with her intelligence and warmth. She fit seamlessly into the group, asking thoughtful questions about the foundation's work and sharing her own experiences with elder care volunteering. After dinner, as we were cleaning up, Emma pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Grandma, Sarah, I need to tell you something. Mom doesn't know I'm here tonight." "Emma, why didn't you tell your mother you were coming to see me?" "Because I knew she'd try to talk me out of it. She's been saying things about you that don't match up with the person I remember or the person I'm seeing tonight." "What kind of things?" "That you've become reclusive and difficult, that you don't want to be around the family anymore, that you might be having some cognitive issues." "But Grandma Sarah, you seem sharper and more engaged than I've ever seen you." "Emma, families sometimes see what they expect to see rather than what's really there." "Is that why you don't come to family events anymore? Because they treat you like you're incompetent?" I struggled with how much to share with Emma. She was 19 now, old enough to understand complex family dynamics, but she was also Jennifer's daughter, and I didn't want to create additional conflict for her. "Emma, I've learned that I'm happiest when I'm around people who value me for who I am, not who they think I should be. Your family isn't wrong to have their own lives and priorities, but those priorities don't always include me in ways that feel meaningful to me. But we love you, Grandma Sarah. At least I love you, and I think Tommy does too, even if he's too cool to admit it. I love you too, sweetheart, more than you'll ever know. And that love doesn't depend on how often we see each other, or whether your parents and I have a complicated relationship." Emma hugged me tightly, and I could feel her tears against my shoulder. "I don't want to lose you, Grandma Sarah. I feel like I'm just getting to know who you really are." "You're not going to lose me, Emma. I'm not going anywhere, and you're welcome in my life whenever you want to be here." As Emma prepared to drive back to college the next morning, she made a request that both touched and worried me. "Grandma." "Sarah, would it be okay if I kept visiting you sometimes, even if the rest of the family doesn't? I know it might create some awkwardness, but I really want to maintain a relationship with you." "Emma, I would love nothing more than to see you regularly, but I want you to think carefully about the potential consequences with your parents. I don't want to be the cause of conflict in your family." "Grandma Sarah, I'm an adult now. I get to choose who I have relationships with, and I choose you." After Emma left, I sat in my kitchen drinking coffee and reflecting on the complexity of family relationships. Here was my granddaughter, offering me the kind of unconditional love and acceptance I'd been craving from her parents. She was willing to risk family conflict to maintain a relationship with me, something her parents had never been willing to do. The irony wasn't lost on me. The generation I'd been trying to reach, my children, had proven unreachable. But the generation beyond them, my grandchildren, might be different. Maybe the values I'd tried to instill had skipped a generation, waiting to manifest in young people who were old enough to make their own choices about relationships and priorities. As winter deepened into the new year, my life settled into rhythms that felt sustainable and fulfilling. Regular visits with Rosa, ongoing work with the foundation, deepening friendships with people who shared my values, and increasingly frequent contact with Emma, who was proving to be as thoughtful and caring as I'd hoped. Marcus had taken my advice about building a life beyond caregiving and had started dating a young woman named Claire, who worked as a physical therapist at a rehabilitation hospital. Claire understood the demands of caring for elderly family members because she worked with families navigating similar challenges every day. When Marcus introduced me to Claire, I could see immediately why he'd been drawn to her. She was kind without being sentimental, practical without being cold, and she treated Rosa with the same gentle respect that Marcus showed her. "Mrs. Hughes," Claire said during our first meeting, "Marcus has told me so much about you and Rosa. It's clear that you've been like family to each other." "Marcus and Rosa saved me from despair," I told her honestly. "They showed me what love looks like when it's freely given and gladly received." "I hope you don't mind me asking, but what happened with your biological family? Marcus mentioned that you'd had some difficulties with your children." I appreciated her directness. "They forgot that relationships require effort from both sides. They started treating me like an obligation rather than a person they enjoyed being around. Eventually, I decided to invest my time and energy in people who actually wanted me in their lives." Claire nodded thoughtfully. "I see that a lot in my work. Adult children who love their parents in theory, but struggle with the practical and emotional demands of maintaining those relationships. It's heartbreaking for everyone involved." "The heartbreaking part is that it doesn't have to be this way. Caring for aging parents can be a source of connection and meaning if people approach it with the right attitude." As spring arrived, I felt more settled and purposeful than I had in years. The foundation was expanding its programs. Rosa was stable in her new facility. Marcus was building a healthy relationship with Claire, and Emma was thriving in college while maintaining regular contact with me. My life had been rebuilt around authentic relationships and meaningful work. I'd learned to value myself enough to walk away from people who didn't value me, and I'd discovered that there were others willing to fill the spaces left by those departures. The abandoned woman from the mall parking lot was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own worth and refused to settle for less than she deserved. It had taken nearly 8 decades and considerable heartbreak to learn this lesson, but it wasn't too late to apply it to whatever years remained ahead of me. The phone call came on a gray Tuesday morning in April, exactly 18 months after that fateful Christmas shopping trip. I was watering the tomato seedlings I'd started in my kitchen when the unfamiliar number appeared on my caller ID. Something about the timing, the formality of the voice on the other end, told me immediately that this wasn't a social call. "Mrs. Hughes, this is Dr. Patterson from St. Mary's Hospital. I'm calling about your daughter, Jennifer Morrison. She's listed you as her emergency contact, and I'm afraid she's been in a serious automobile accident." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Despite everything that had happened between us, despite the hurt and disappointment and months of minimal contact, Jennifer was still my child. The protective instinct that had driven me through sleepless nights when she was colicky as a baby, through worried hours when she was learning to drive as a teenager, surged back with overwhelming force. "How serious? Is she going to be okay?" "She's stable, but she has multiple injuries, including a head trauma. She's unconscious, and we're not sure when she might wake up. Her husband is here, but he asked me to call you specifically. I was at the hospital within 20 minutes, my hands still dirty from the garden soil, my heart pounding with fear and adrenaline. The ICU was a maze of beeping machines and hushed voices, and when I finally found Jennifer's room, I was shocked by how small and vulnerable she looked connected to all those tubes and monitors. Jason, my son-in-law, was sitting in the chair beside her bed, holding her hand and looking like he'd aged 10 years since I'd last seen him. When he saw me, his face crumpled with relief. "Sarah, thank God you came. I didn't know who else to call. The kids are at school, and I haven't told them yet how serious this is." "What happened, Jason?" "A drunk driver ran a red light and hit her car head-on. The paramedics said if she'd been driving anything smaller than that SUV, she probably wouldn't have survived." I approached the bed slowly, taking in the extent of Jennifer's injuries. Her face was swollen and bruised, her left arm was in a cast, and the steady rhythm of the ventilator was the only sound indicating that she was still breathing on her own. "Have you called Michael and David?" "They're both flying in tonight." "Sarah, I know things have been complicated between you and Jennifer lately, but she's going to need all of us to get through this." Complicated. Such a gentle word for the wreckage of our relationship, for the abandonment and gaslighting that had driven a wedge between us that seemed impossible to bridge. But looking at my daughter lying unconscious in that hospital bed, none of our past conflicts seemed to matter. This was Jennifer, the little girl who used to crawl into bed with Ronald and me during thunderstorms, the teenager who'd confided her first heartbreak to me, the young woman who'd called me crying from her dorm room when college felt overwhelming. I spent the next 3 days essentially living at the hospital, leaving only to shower and change clothes. Michael and David arrived that evening, and for the first time in over a year, the 4 of us were in the same room together. The circumstances were terrible, but there was something healing about being united in our concern for Jennifer. On the 3rd day, she began to stir. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused, and the first word she spoke was, "Mom." "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here." Her recovery was slow but steady. The head trauma had caused some temporary memory issues, and for several days she seemed to think I was still the mother she'd known before our relationship deteriorated. She held my hand, asked me to read to her, wanted me to help her with physical therapy exercises. During one of these sessions, when she was still confused about recent events, she said something that broke my heart. "Mom, I had the strangest dream. I dreamed that we weren't talking to each other anymore, that we'd had some terrible fight, and you weren't part of our lives. It felt so real, so awful." "It was just a dream, honey. Don't worry about it now. Promise me we'll never let anything come between us like that. Promise me we'll always be close." "I promise we'll always love each other," I said, choosing my words carefully. As Jennifer's memory returned and she began to piece together the reality of our estranged relationship, the dynamic between us shifted again. She became more guarded, more formal, though she was clearly grateful for my presence during her recovery. One afternoon, when she was feeling stronger, she asked the question I'd been dreading. "Mom, why did you come? After everything that's happened between us, why did you drop everything to be here?" "Because you're my daughter, Jennifer. No matter what's happened between us, no matter how hurt or angry I might be, that will never change. But I know we've hurt you. I know things haven't been good between us for a long time. Jennifer, when someone you love is lying unconscious in a hospital bed, past grievances become irrelevant very quickly." She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands folded on the white hospital blanket. "Mom, I need to tell you something. That day at the mall, when you went to the restroom." My heart began to race. Was she finally going to acknowledge what had really happened? "We didn't leave you by accident." The admission hung in the air between us, and I felt a mixture of vindication and renewed hurt. After 18 months of being told I was confused, that I was misremembering, that there had been some innocent miscommunication, she was finally telling the truth. "Why, Jennifer? Why would you do that to me?" Tears began to stream down her face. "Because we were frustrated and selfish, and we wanted to teach you a lesson. We thought if we left you there for a little while, you'd realize how dependent you were on us and maybe start being more appreciative." "You wanted to teach me a lesson? By abandoning me in a mall parking lot?" We were watching from the car. We saw you come out of the restroom, saw you looking around for us. We were going to go back and get you after a few minutes, but then we started arguing about whether it was mean, and by the time we decided to go back, you were gone. I was there for over an hour, Jennifer. I was there when the mall closed. We looked for you. We drove around the parking lot. We went back. Inside, we even called the security office. But we couldn't find you, and we were too ashamed to keep looking. We convinced ourselves that you'd found another way home, that you were probably fine. And then you spent the next day trying to convince me it never happened. We were scared, Mom. We knew what we'd done was horrible, but admitting it felt impossible. So we told ourselves that maybe you were confused. Maybe your memory wasn't reliable. It was easier than facing what we'd really done to you. I sat in the chair beside her bed, processing this confession that I'd waited so long to hear. Part of me felt relieved to finally have the truth acknowledged. Part of me felt devastated all over again, hearing the calculated cruelty described in such matter-of-fact terms. Jennifer, do you have any idea what that night did to me? Do you understand how it felt to be abandoned by my own children and then told I was imagining things? I think I'm beginning to understand. And Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for leaving. You there. I'm sorry for lying about it afterward, and I'm sorry for all the ways we've failed you since Dad died. It was the apology I'd been waiting for, the acknowledgement I'd needed. But it had taken a near-death experience to bring it about, and I wondered if it would have ever come otherwise. What happens now, Jennifer? I don't know. I know I can't undo what we did to you. I know you've built a life that doesn't include us, and maybe that's what you need. But if there's any chance for us to rebuild some kind of relationship, I'd like to try. Over the following weeks, as Jennifer recovered and returned home, we began the delicate process of rebuilding some form of connection. It wasn't the same relationship we'd had before Ronald's death, and it could never be the close, trusting bond I'd once thought we shared. Too much damage had been done, too many hurtful words spoken, too much time had passed. But it was something. We had dinner together once a month, careful conversations where we both tried to avoid the topics that might reopen old wounds. I was included in some family gatherings, though I maintained my independence and my other relationships. Emma was thrilled by this development, though I made it clear that my reconciliation with her mother didn't change my own priorities and commitments. The foundation continued to grow and thrive. Rosa passed away peacefully one morning in early summer, with Marcus and me holding her hands as she slipped away. Her funeral was attended by dozens of people whose lives she'd touched, including several residents from Willowbrook who considered her family. Marcus and Claire married in a small ceremony the following autumn, and I had the honor of walking him down the aisle since Rosa couldn't be there to do it. Watching him promise to love and cherish someone who understood and supported his values was one of the most joyful moments I'd experienced in years. The reading of my will, when it eventually comes, will still be a shock to my children. Despite our tentative reconciliation, I haven't changed the major provisions that direct most of my estate to the foundation, and to people like Marcus who understand what family really means. My children will receive their token bequests, enough to know they weren't forgotten, but not enough to continue taking me for granted. The letter I wrote to accompany the will explains my reasoning clearly and without malice. It acknowledges the progress we've made in rebuilding our relationship while maintaining that actions have consequences, that love must be demonstrated through behavior, not just words. I hope you understand, the letter concludes, that this isn't about punishment or revenge. It's about rewarding the kind of love I want to see in the world and supporting people who understand that caring for others is a privilege, not a burden. Emma will receive her inheritance through the scholarship program she's already earned, ensuring that she benefits from my estate while also demonstrating the values I want to promote. The other grandchildren will have the same opportunity if they choose to pursue it. I'm 80 years old now, and while I don't know how many years I have left, I know they'll be lived on my own terms. surrounded by people who value me for who I am, rather than what I can give them. The foundation work gives me purpose. My friendships provide companionship and joy, and my reconciliation with Jennifer, limited though it may be, has brought a measure of peace to that chapter of my life. The woman who was abandoned in that mall parking lot is gone, replaced by someone who understands her own worth and refuses to accept less than she deserves. It took 8 decades to learn this lesson, but it wasn't too late to apply it to the time I have remaining. Sometimes the most painful betrayals lead to the most important discoveries about what we truly need and deserve from the people in our lives. My children taught me that lesson in the cruelest possible way, but I'm grateful for having learned it at all. Love shouldn't come with conditions, and family shouldn't be based on convenience. When we understand this truth, we can build relationships that sustain us rather than drain us, that lift us up rather than tear us down. That's the legacy I want to leave behind. Not just money, but the example of someone who chose to value herself enough to walk away from relationships that diminished her, and who found the courage to build new ones based on mutual respect and genuine affection. In the end, that's what family really means. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.